Yeah, you're reading the title right. Conflicting reports on this Montreal Canadiens defenseman. Now, last time we had talked about this guy, we made a video talking about the great news that he got called back up to the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, you know who we're talking about. Today's video was about Arber Xhekaj, a guy who used his time at the AHL to become a bit more disciplined, to get some point production out there, and, in the words of the man himself, to not take things for granted. Arber Xhekaj is a guy who is 22 years old, definitely has a lot of value heading into the next few years. Especially with his brother being in the Canadian system too, there's a really nice connection here that we have talked about on a multiple number of videos. But when it comes to the idea of an Arber Xhekaj trade, we had an idea about this floating around during the weekend. It's not the biggest surprise in the world to see a guy who gets sent down after being a full-time NHL player a year ago, especially at 21, 22 years old. It's not the biggest surprise if a guy like that gets sent down to see his name be mentioned by different NHL personalities as a potential trade. Oh, this guy was a young prospect who was in the NHL and now he's sent down. What's the status on that? This is where Elliotte Friedman went out during the Hockey Day in Canada broadcast on Saturday and said this regarding Arber Xhekaj and the Canadiens. I wouldn't be surprised if Philly was one of the teams that was calling Montreal about Xhekaj. I don't know if it was a Cutter Gauthier deal or something else, but it makes a lot of sense. If Xhekaj is not going to be a Canadian, man, he's a flyer. Friedman repeats, though, that the Habs have told other teams they are not trading Xhekaj. And this was just a few days ago. We didn't make a video about it because it was a passing comment. Oh yeah, the Canadiens have a guy that they value and a guy that they're not going to trade. Wow, that's such a great video idea to make, Lego, right? And I guess you could say, oh, but you could talk about the idea of Philadelphia being interested in that profile coming together, because obviously it makes sense, right? Arber Xhekaj is a big brute of a human being that can hit, he can check, he can make people answer the bell, he fights really well, and you could say that these qualities of his physicality have hurt him, actually, in the ways that he has played this season, but of course, with him getting sent down to Laval, hopefully he's able to take fewer penalties for the remainder of this NHL season. And that kind of a profile, if you wanted to talk about the Philadelphia style, you talk about John Tortorella and his reputation, what he likes out of his players. Torts is the kind of coach that if he catches you playing with a lack of heart or a lack of pace, he's going to go out there and punish you because of it. If you show heart on your sleeve in front of John Tortorella, that guy's going to respect you, and Arber Xhekaj fits that bill pretty well. Now, before we go over to the conflicting report on why this entire video is being made now, I just wanted to highlight that idea of a Cutter Gauthier trade for Arber Xhekaj, that hypothetical idea that Friedman went out there and tossed out. If the Montreal Canadiens were indeed asked by Philly to do some sort of a Gauthier for Xhekaj swap, and the Canadiens said no, I'm not gonna lie, man. Kent Hughes, I feel like that's a little bit of an L. Like, sure, we had talked all this entire time about Arber Xhekaj and his intangibles, the past. He was an undrafted guy, signed out of the OHL. He was in Costco, and just a few years later, he's in the NHL. He's got his brother in the Canadiens organization, too. Even though it's a fantastic story, at the end of the day, Cutter Gauthier is a top 5 pick caliber prospect and a guy who was such a stud at both the World Juniors and the Boston College Eagles system in the NCAA. He has been so good. 30 points, 21 games played this season in the NCAA, and 12 points in 7 games in the World Junior Tournament for Team USA, and he had all the awards at this year's tourney. All-Star team, best forward, top 3 player in the team, the gold medal. He was a stud. And with that pedigree of being a top 5 pick, just from 2022, so 2 seasons ago, I feel like the Canadiens probably would have stood to gain a lot from a profile like this. Imagine a top 6 with Cutter Gauthier, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovsky, Kirby Dach, and Alex Newhook. That's a young, up-and-coming top 6 that will just get better with age. And the fact that Cutter Gauthier was traded for Jamie Drysdale in the real trade that we saw, I said, hey, it's a pretty good deal. Like, for both sides, Philly is getting a defenseman, they need more defense, and of course, Cutter Gauthier, the prize top scorer in this trade, is going over to Anaheim, whom Cutter Gauthier can play well with and fit alongside of some of their other centers like Mason McTavish and Leo Carlsson. These are some great names, and because they have a lot of defensemen, I mean, it's understandable to see why Drysdale was sent off. Montreal, you could debate the same things going on here. How many young defensemen are on this Canadiens blue line right now? You've got the Jordan Harrises, you've got the Strubles, the Ghoulies, the Xhekajs, and you just sent Justin Barron down. The Montreal Canadiens, we'd already talked about this in several videos, they kind of have a lot of guys. So if you had the opportunity to trade away one of these players for a top 5 prospect in Cutter Gauthier, honestly, I think it's kind of an L that they didn't take it, but of course, that's just all speculation from Friedman. Without further ado, though, let's go over onto our source that maybe has a bit of a conflicting idea. Our source is Jean-Charles Lajoie, who had himself an article on TVA Sports. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and read this, but it is in French, so you have to translate it to English like me if you don't really read French properly. This is the piece from yesterday, I'm pretty sure, the 23rd. Don't be surprised to see Arber Xhekaj get traded, JC says. The Canadiens recalled Xhekaj from the Rocket late Monday. Terrific news for the robust defender, but also for a large majority of the team supporters who have been calling for this recall for several weeks. The article talks about the Xhekaj conversation. It goes over his toughness, etc., etc. Jean-Charles says he likes the fact they called him back up, but a certain fairness is also achieved with the dismissal of Barron to Laval. The young right-hander, like Xhekaj, does not need to go through the waiver process either. The Montreal Canadiens GM told me there were no plans to test Xhekaj in a fourth-line winger role. This is commendable in the circumstances. Xhekaj has an interesting profile given his robustness, the kind of profile that suits several GMs in the NHL. The idea of recalling him was the right one, and I think the Habs are doing it at the right time, 6.5 weeks before the deadline. I know you love Xhekaj and don't want to hear about a trade involving him at all, but I repeat, I am not convinced at all that the Sheriff is a part of Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes' cards in the medium and long term. With all the talent that the Habs will have at the blue line, specifically on that left side, I'm afraid there will be no room for the organization. So, Jean-Charles goes out there and writes, don't be surprised to see Xhekaj involved in a trade between now and the upcoming draft in June. A trade that will make you jump, exactly like when Hughes, in the middle of the Bell Center during the first round of the 2022 draft, announced he had given away Romanov in a 3-team trade. So, even though Elliotte Friedman on Saturday's headline said the Canadiens have told other teams, no, we're not trading Xhekaj, you've got Montreal media on TVA Sports writing articles saying, no, I disagree. I don't think the Canadiens have Xhekaj in their long-term plans, and you shouldn't be surprised if he actually gets traded. And this is one of the things that I just absolutely love to see in a way. Like, insiders, journalists, I mean, these are people that cover hockey from different perspectives. Of course, like Jean-Charles does mostly Canadiens-related stuff, and he writes articles and has his own TV show talking about Canadian stuff. Elliotte Friedman covers the league with the multiple sources he has around the league. So, to hear conflicting ideas, of course, you could say, okay, one guy's connected, one guy maybe isn't as connected, one guy is just spitting off the top of the dome, the other guy is retelling what he's hearing. But at the end of the day, you know, because there is contention, because there is conflict, I wanted to go out there and make this video because for all the French stuff that gets published on YouTube, I go out there and say it all the time, man. Like, French media is another animal. You know, I'm here in Vancouver, BC, we don't get a lot of the Francophone reporting, not a lot of the radio hits or the phone calls in the shows or the articles or the websites or the newspapers or the television. Like, we don't get a lot of that. And because Montreal hockey is so big over there, like, just some of the extra stuff that's covered doesn't really translate into English too often. But when you look at it, when you acknowledge what's actually being said, it's kind of like the wild, wild west of hockey rumors and discussions. So, Montreal Canadiens fans, what are your thoughts on the idea of an Arber Xhekaj trade? And what reaction do you have to these conflicting reports? Friedman suggested the idea that maybe the Canadiens had an opportunity to get a guy like Cutter Gauthier for Xhekaj, but he said it's, of course, just an idea. He doesn't know if it's really the case here. But if that was it, then what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the idea of the Canadiens standing pat and telling other teams, no, we're not trading Xhekaj? And what are your thoughts on the idea of Montreal journalists saying, nope, I'm calling their bluff. They may actually trade him soon. And if Arber Xhekaj does find himself getting traded, what do you think the price is? If you're a Philadelphia Flyers fan, what are your thoughts on this idea? Would you want to be involved in an Arber Xhekaj trade? Get Drysdale and Xhekaj. Improve your blue line with two very capable guys who are young within the span of a few weeks. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.